Hello everyone. So today, before we get started into our next little review session, I want to give you a little bit of a math joke to make your week a little brighter. So because I'm a geometry teacher, I'm going to give you a geometry joke. So why is the obtuse triangle always upset? So the acute triangle says, because it is never right. Ha ha ha, claps, snaps. I can hear you on the other end. Anyways, so I wanted to get started today with just a little bit of laughter so that you guys can make it through your week. And today, what we're going to be starting on is, well, if you can be able to see it, is solving for a variable. Now, before we really get hard and deep into this, I want you to review or recall what a variable is. So in math, a variable is simply this. And if you're taking notes, this might be a good thing to write down, and excuse my terrible handwriting. But a variable is going to be, in mathematics, a letter. So you know your alphabet, a letter that represents a quantity. So quantity just simply means a number, okay? Quantity, it's something that you can put a number to. So today what we're just simply going to be doing is solving for a variable. So before we jump into our geometry stuff and we're looking for missing angles and missing side measures of triangles and different things, what I first want you to be able to do is solve for a missing variable, okay? And so I'm just going to read this off to you, but you can solve a formula or a literal equation for any one of the variable. To solve it, you're going to underline the variable you're solving for, and then you're just going to undo what's been done. So undo. You're going to undo the problem to see what you can find. So using inverse operations. Inverse simply means opposite. Okay, so just remember that, opposite. The same way you would solve an equation or an inequality. So it gives us an example of a formula used to find the circumference of a circle, right? And we know that circumference is c equals pi d. Not something you need to remember because, if you ever need to find it, you can look that up really quickly. But if you know the circumference, you can find the diameter, right? So if we know one part of the puzzle, then we can solve it to find another piece. We're always looking for a missing value, right? So let's do an example together really quickly. So it says solve c equals pi d, and I'm looking at this right here for d. So in order to solve for d, so d is what we're looking for, what do we need to have? So you might be telling yourself, well, in order for me to find d, I have to know what c is, and we know what pi is. Pi is just a symbol for a number. But c has to equal pi d. So if we're looking for d, we're just going to go backwards. We're going to undo this to see what we can find. So if c equals pi d, and we want to get d, we need to get d by itself. We need him to be a lone variable. So pi is multiplied to d. So we need to get rid of pi. So we're going to divide both sides by pi because pi is multiplied to begin with. And if you remember, when you divide a number, so if you have 6 and you divide 6 by 6, what do you get? 1. So if we're going to divide both sides by pi, well, what is pi divided by pi? 1. Okay? So pi divided by pi equals 1. So you're going to have c divided by pi equals 1d. Well, what is 1 times any number? 1 times 6 equals that number, right? Well, what is 1 times d? That's going to be D. So we can just leave that as C divided by pi equals D. So now we don't know what D is, but if we had, or we don't know what C is, but if we had something for C, then we could easily have D. This gives us an idea of how we would find D. Okay, so let's move on to the next one and see what we can figure out. And I'm going to erase a little bit of this. Let's put this in a different color, purple. So solve, it tells us solve F equals 9 divided by 5C plus 32 for C. So first we need to think about what's happening. So we want to solve it for C. We want to get C by itself. Well, what's in the way of that? Well, first you have to undo 32. Okay, so if we're adding 32 and we want to get C by itself, then we need to subtract 32 on both sides. Because remember, in our last video, we talked about solving an equation. So if we're solving for C, we need to get C by itself. So we're going to subtract 32, being the opposite. Well, 32 minus 32 is 0. Okay, and now we have F minus 32 equals 9 divided by C. Well, now we have a fraction. I know, we're just not big fans of fractions, but we're going to try this out. So if we have F minus 32, I'm going to put this over to the side so you can really see what I'm working with, equals 9 divided by 5C. 9 divided by 5 is multiplied to C. Well, if it's multiplied to C, how do we get C by itself? Well, what's the opposite of multiplication? If you said division, you would be correct. So we need to divide 9 divided by 5. If you remember fractions, so 9/5, dividing a fraction is the same thing as multiplying the reciprocal, and the reciprocal is just flipping it. So instead of dividing by 9/5, we're going to multiply by 5/9. So 9/5 times 5/9. If you remember multiplying fractions, you just multiply the top with the top and the numerator with the numerator and the denominator with the denominator. So you're going to end up with 1. But what we do to one side also has to be done to the other. So if we had F minus 32, we have to multiply by 5/9 just like we did on the other side. Well, what is 5/9? Now we have to use our distributive property, okay? What is 5/9 times F? Well, 5/9 F. And what is 5/9 times negative 32? Well, we know it's going to be negative. Well, what's 32 times 5? So 32 times 5. Well, actually, in this problem, it doesn't even go as far as we're going. So we can actually just stop right here. So where we stopped here is fine. Okay? And 1C is the same thing as C. So that's why you only see C over here. Okay? So now we're going to do a little bit of an example so that you can do a few of these on your own. Okay? So if if the area, this is actually the area of a triangle, but if area equals half of B times H, we want to solve for B, okay? Which means we need to get B by itself. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, what is multiplied by B in order to get it by itself? Well, it's multiplied by h. So if we're multiplying, we need to divide it. So we're going to divide both sides by h. Well, when you divide this side by h, you get h divided by h is 1. So you're left with 1/2 b and a divided by h. So you're going to have a divided by h equals 1/2 b. Okay, so 1/2 is still multiplied to b, and we want to get b by itself. So 1/2 times b. So we need to divide both sides by 1/2. Well, when you divide by a fraction, again, you're multiplying the reciprocal. So you're going to multiply by 2. So instead of dividing by 1/2, you're actually just multiplying by 2 over 1. Okay? So if we multiply that by 2, you have 2 times 1/2. Well, what's 2 times 1/2? Again, that's 1. So now we have b by itself. Well, what you did to that side, you also have to do to this side. So 2 times the area over the height equals, so b is going to equal 2 times the area over h. So this is our final product. B equals 2 times a over h. Okay? So I want you to pause this video and try numbers 2 through 6. So now that you've done numbers 2 through 6, we're going to try number 7. So number 7 tells us that m plus n plus p plus q equals 360. And we want to solve for n. So we want to get n by itself. What's keeping us from doing that? So we have m, p, and q all added to n. Well, in order to get n by itself, we have to do the opposite of what's added to it. So we need to subtract. Let's start with the first one. Let's start with m. So we need to subtract m from both sides. Now we have n plus p plus q. Now we still have p and q. So what do we need to do there? We need to do the opposite. So minus p minus p. So now we have that left. And we would do the same thing for q. Minus q minus q. Now we have n by itself. So n is equal to 360 minus m minus p minus q. Okay, so that is our final product. And now I want you to complete numbers 8 and 9 on your own. Okay, and then you will have an exit ticket that you will need to fill out outside of this or after this. And that will be located on your weekly agenda, how to get to it. And I look forward to seeing how we're doing.